Joining me back here on the set, Francesca Page, Newsmax TV contributor, and our legal analyst, Michelle Suskauer. Good to see you, Michelle.
Thank you.
All right, so real quickly to set this up, let's look back. There was a vigil yesterday, UC Santa Barbara, and we heard from the president of the University of California system, Janet Napolitano, the former head of Homeland Security. Let's listen to Napolitano.
None of us wants to be here for an occasion like this, but we are. We're here because a series of violent crimes took the lives of 6 of our UC Santa Barbara students and injured 9 more. We are here because in this moment of loss, there is a human desire to come together, to reach out to one another for love and for support. We are here because we want to share memories of the young lives struck down far too soon. It's important that in our grief, in our grasping for any glimmer of understanding into what can only be seen as unfathomable tragedy, it is important that we not lose sight of the lives we have gathered to remember.
There we have Janet Napolitano, the president of the University of California system, and back here with us, Francesca Page, Michelle Suskauer. You know, obviously a very emotional situation here, guys, and there's always the desire to find who's responsible aside from the person believed to be the shooter in this case, and so almost instantly the question turns to liability.
Sure, absolutely, and understandably so. First of all, can you look to the parents as to whether or not they would be potentially liable for the acts of their adult son? And my understanding is the parents did call law enforcement to report these issues, and they're concerned. But again, can a parent be liable for the actions of an adult child? I know in Florida, the courts have said no. And so looking then, is there any other potential source of liability? You look then to maybe the city of Santa Barbara, or you look to the police agency who really sort of passed over a situation that could potentially have stopped him from committing these heinous acts. And again, there may be a limit legislatively on their liability, but that's possible. It's possible there's liability there. But again, law enforcement makes snap decisions all the time. Sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong. In this case, unfortunately, they were wrong.
And we know now, there's been an update on this, and the father of this teenager has blamed the National Rifle Association and what he called craven politicians. So I think there's a lot of speculation right now as to who's to blame, whether it's coming down to them, and perhaps there needs to be a look at better licensing of firearms, and it's coming down to that again.
You know, we've had this conversation so many times that, can this country deal with appropriately licensing, especially when there may be mental illness, and did he fall on the spectrum of being mentally ill? And there's a question as to that. He had Asperger's. That's not considered mentally ill. But again, it's another horrific tragedy that we seem to tolerate.
Sure.
And we shouldn't. And again, I'm taking off my legal analyst hat right now. But again, is this going to continue a conversation that will be meaningful in terms of change? We'll see.
Well, of course, let's not forget, too, that 3 people died in this attack and they were stabbed to death as well. And also, California does have some of the stricter registration and gun control measures in this country. And so,
And yet he was allowed, and yet he was permitted to buy, 3 firearms within a short period of time, even in that strict situation. So, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a tough call here, and we want to give the parents of the victims enough time. They're certainly entitled to say what they want to say, and they're obviously a very important part of this conversation. But Michelle, if we don't have the conversation, if it doesn't continue after Newtown, Connecticut, do you what makes you believe it would continue after this tragedy?
And that's a very good point. I thought after Newtown, if we're ever going to have this conversation where there's meaningful change, that it would be after Newtown. But again, no tragedy is worse than another tragedy. They're all horrific because there's been a loss of life. But again, there's such an accumulation of these situations. We seem to be growing numb to them, and it's upsetting to see. But again, if we don't continue to have the conversation about gun control, about how do we license appropriately, how do we identify individuals who may be on the verge of showing signs and doing things. Again, we can't predict and say, you know what, we think you're going to be committing a crime, so we can't sell you a firearm, but there needs to be something that is done. We're continuing to see these tragedies. We
are continuing to see them, and you, I'm sure, have seen a lot of the problems of mental health within the legal system as well, and clearly we can't handle that aspect of it, and we'll have to have you back to discuss that part of the problem of mental health within our penal system right now, and how problematic that is. Right, and there's certain, again, Michelle, we'll have to leave it there. We got to run, but because I do want to play. We have that soundbite from Richard Martinez, the father of one of the Santa Barbara shooting victims, and we're going to give him the last word as a result of this tragedy.
We're all proud to be Americans, but what kind of a message does it send to the world when we have such a rudderless bunch of idiots in government? I can't tell you how angry I am. It's just awful. And no parent should have to go through this. No parent. To have a kid die because in this kind of a situation, what has changed? Have we learned nothing? These things are going to continue until somebody does something. So where the hell is the leadership? Where the hell is these people we elect to Congress that we spend so much money on? These people are getting rich sitting in Congress. And what do? They don't take care of our kids. My kid died because nobody responded to what occurred at Sandy Hook. Those parents lost little kids. It's bad enough that I lost my 20-year-old, but I had 20 years with my son. That's all I ever have. But those people lost their children at 6 and 7 years old. How do you think they feel? And who's talking to them now? Who's doing anything for them now? Who is standing up for those kids that died back then in an elementary school? Why wasn't something done? It's outrageous.